A little after 7 a.m. on the 3rd of February 1996, the Orange County Police Department responded to a call over Lil Chump convenience store, which was located on Clarkona-Ocoee Road in Orlando, Florida. A certain witness had called the police attention to an odd discovery that morning. According to the witness, he was driving by the Lil Chump convenience store around 6:55 a.m. when he noticed that the store's lights were off. He found it strange because the store workers would usually open by that time to commence sales. Just to be sure of what was happening, the witness attempted to enter the store, but before that, he turned around and parked close to the store to look through the windows. He claimed he didn't see a store clerk, which was unusual. A nagging suspicion then made him to contact the police to relay his concerns before driving away. When the deputies arrived at the scene, they found two guys from an armored car company waiting to pick up a cash deposit at the store, but the door was locked. The deputies called the store phone, but nobody answered. They then made a brief rounds at the store and discovered in the parking lot a white car. Deputies ran a license plate check and discovered that the car belonged to the store manager, Terrence Paquette. They called Terrence's residence to confirm if he was home, but they didn't get any response either. There was no way for the deputies to get into the store as it was already locked from the outside. Luckily, another employee from the store who had closed the night before was just driving by when he spotted the police at the front of the store. He then let the deputies in with his own keys. While they tried to open the door, the police discovered a minor amount of blood on the exterior lock. On getting inside, the police found Terrence Paquette, the store manager, on the floor of the men's restroom, already dead in a pool of blood. According to the medical examiner, Terrence Paquette had suffered from multiple stab wounds. He had been stabbed 73 times around his neck, torso, and extremities. His heart and lungs were severely punctured. Investigators observed a considerable amount of bloodstains around the store and concluded that the person who stabbed Terrence Paquette had also been hurt. There were bloodstains in several locations of the store, particularly on the freezer door, the freezer flap, the lottery machine behind the counter, the key cylinder on the entry and exit door, and the door push bar. The blood patterns in the store demonstrated the suspect's movement throughout the area, from the restroom to the beverage freezer to behind the cash register where money was stolen, and ultimately on the entry and exit door where the suspect most likely fled the scene. According to the deputies, after taking about $1,000 from the safe underneath the cash register, the perpetrator took Terrence Paquette's keys and locked the doors to the store. The question of who could have murdered Terrence bugged the police and his family at the time. Terrence Paquette was said to have arrived at the Lil Champ food store between 5 and 6 in the morning to set up for a 6 a.m. opening like he usually did. Unfortunately, within a few minutes of arriving at the store, he was brutally murdered by an unidentified assailant. The police questioned those who knew him, but nothing much was known about Terrence because he had only recently relocated to Orlando, Florida. He worked 60 hours a week and did not have many known acquaintances. The investigators rapidly followed up on all leads in an effort to identify his killer, but there were hardly any witnesses to the crime. Although they had all the necessary evidence, the investigators lacked the means to put it to use. The blood samples taken from different locations at the crime scene were sent to a crime lab, and all samples were determined to have originated from the same unidentified killer. The following year, in 1997, a detective closed the case and documented that it was pending further investigative leads. On July 22, 2003, a different detective reopened the case, re-interviewing witnesses and obtaining buccal swabs to compare with the suspect's blood, but there were no matches found. On March 17, 2003, an analyst entered the unidentified DNA profile from the freezer door handle into the combined DNA index database, but no matches were found either. Another detective, Brian Savelli, took up the investigation in 2019 and kept working to identify the suspect whose blood had been left behind in various locations of the store. During the course of going through the case, the idea of genetic genealogy came to Detective Brian Savelli's mind. Genetic genealogy uses a known DNA profile to reverse engineer a family tree for the unknown suspect. It became a well-liked new investigative tool in 2018 when the officials in California used it to pinpoint the Golden State Killer. Finally, in March 2021, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement was contacted by the Orange County Sheriff's Office to help with the investigation. To create a thorough genealogical profile that may be utilized to generate fresh leads that could help identify Terrence Piquette's killer, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement hired Othram to use cutting-edge DNA testing. Othram created a thorough genealogical profile using forensic-grade genome sequencing. After the profile was successfully created, Othram gave it to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement, whose detectives uploaded the DNA profile into two open ancestry databases, GetMatch and Family Tree. They later created a family tree, and it revealed that the blood samples originated from a person who shared genetic ancestry with a couple, Kenneth Stowe Sr. and his wife. Investigators were then led to the couple's 3 children. Authorities started a background check on the 3 children and discovered that one of them, Kenneth Robert Stowe Jr., a 54-year-old Eustis resident, had lived across the street from Terrence Piquette in 1996. Kenneth Robert Stowe was 28 years old at the time of the murder. Detective Brian Savelli also found out that he had once worked at the Lilchamp convenience store. All the puzzles were coming together. In order to apprehend the murderer, detectives got the court order to commence a GPS surveillance on Robert Stowe Jr. The GPS device was placed in his vehicle on August 27, 2021, outside of his building supply business. According to Detective Brian Savelli, while following Robert Stowe on September 14, 2021, he saw him throw a bag filled with beer cans into a trash can. The bag was taken by the detective and submitted at the Orange County's crime scene unit for testing. Forensics discovered that the DNA on one of the beer cans matched the blood from the beverage freezer door handle in 1996. Authorities arrested Robert Stowe using the fresh evidence. When questioned, he acknowledged working at the convenience store but denied killing Terrence Piquette. Robert Stowe is charged with first-degree murder with a firearm and robbery with a deadly weapon. He was ordered to be jailed without bond by a judge. Since Terrence Piquette's death, all of his family members have passed away, but officials informed a number of his friends about the arrest in the case.
A disturbing discovery was made in Colorado's South St. Vrain Canyon on June 4, 2006. Not far from Lyons, a decomposing body was discovered by hikers. The scene created an enigmatic image. It appears as though the woman's body was pulled from a shallow grave, probably by a feral animal. A sleeping bag, a pillow in its case, and a pair of yellow ski pants were all carefully folded nearby. Her fingerprints could not be used to identify her due to her state of decomposition. Only one clue, which was a single cross ring, was discovered with her. Who was this woman? And what terrible circumstances might have resulted in her demise? Colorado's Boulder County is home to a diversified population that flourishes in the area's scenic beauty. The area is well known for combining historic and recreational sites, providing people with a well-rounded way of life. Living here means taking advantage of outdoor pursuits, such as hiking trails and historic sites. The neighborhood is renowned for its unity and is friendly and inviting. Boulder County does not, however, come without difficulties, just like many other places. Although generally low, there have been some dark periods in the crime rate. The June 4, 2006, Angela Wild cold case is one instance of such an incident. This case was an enigma that went unsolved for more than 10 years. A group of hikers decided to explore the beautiful trails close to Lyons in the South St. Vrain Canyon of Colorado on a seemingly ordinary day on June 4, 2006. They had no idea that their journey would result in a finding that would confound the locals and the police for years to come. They came upon a grisly sight as they continued their journey down the canyon. A decaying body not far from the trail was spotted. The bleak reality of what was ahead of them abruptly eclipsed the canyon's serene beauty. The hikers promptly notified the authorities, who promptly arrived to conduct an investigation. After a more thorough investigation, deputies and investigators concluded that the remains belonged to a female. The way the body was positioned and the surrounding evidence pointed to it having been buried in a shallow grave at first, and then discovered by a wild animal that was probably attracted to the smell. Personal items such as a sleeping bag, pillow and matching pillowcase, and a pair of yellow ski pants were arranged neatly not far from the grave. These objects, which didn't appear to have been damaged by the weather, created a spooky image of the woman's last moments. For the investigators, this advanced state of decomposition presented a major challenge. Conventional identification techniques, like fingerprint analysis, were ineffective. A cross ring discovered with the body was the only item that could have provided a hint as to who the woman was. This jewelry, which might have sentimental significance, turned into the center of the inquiry. Seeking to learn the truth, the sheriff's office made contact with the coroner's office to request assistance. It was challenging to determine the precise cause of death, though, due to the state of the body. Even though there were no obvious injuries, such as gunshot wounds, stab wounds, or broken bones, foul play was a strong possibility. In light of the condition of the remains, the coroner was unable to rule out more heinous methods, such as strangulation, even in the absence of such injuries. The discovery of a white, powdery substance on the body and surrounding the grave added to the mystery. This white powdery substance was determined by lab testing to be calcium oxide, also referred to as quicklime. When it comes into contact with moisture, this substance produces heat and causes decomposition more quickly. This quicklime, which weighed about 50 pounds, covered the body of the victim and penetrated the ground surrounding the grave about 14 inches down. Its presence indicated an intentional act and suggested a deliberate attempt to accelerate the body decomposition process. The shallow grave, the well-folded items, and the application of quicklime all suggested a hurried attempt to hide the crime. Even though the body showed evidence of animal predation, the case was made even more confusing by the absence of any other obvious injuries. There were a lot of unanswered questions in the community. They wondered who the woman was and who would want to hurt her. The Boulder County Sheriff's Office moves quickly after learning of the body's location. Aware of the seriousness of the situation and the demand for public support, they made contact and asked anyone who had information to come forward. The reaction was tremendous. Numerous tips were received, many of which pointed to missing women from across the nation. The overwhelming amount of these tips created a dismal image, emphasizing the concerning number of missing women nationwide as well as in the metro area. Devoted Boulder County Sheriff's Officer Jason Oakers thought back on the emotional cost of the investigation. He talked about the heartbreaking reality of thousands of women going missing and the suffering their families went through while they searched for answers. Every tip could lead to something, a potential resolution to a family's worst fear. Every name was thoroughly investigated by the sheriff's office, leaving no detail unexplored. To help with their investigation, the sheriff's office worked with other agencies. They made use of resources from the Colorado Bureau of Investigation, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and the National Missing and Unidentified Persons System. The group's goal was to cross-reference information and reduce the number of possible identities for the victim. Luckily, a breakthrough occurred in October of 2006. A woman brought her alarming report to the attention of the Longmont Police Department. It had been a while since she'd seen her friend, whom she called Angela Wiles. Her account of Angela's death was remarkably similar to the corpse discovered in the canyon. She even mentioned a unique ring that matched the cross ring discovered with the remains and that Angela frequently wore. Investigators looked further into Angela Wilde's past using this lead. They learned that Angela was from the Longmont community. The friend's physical description matched the features of the body, confirming the possible match even more. Science was called upon by the sheriff's office to verify the identity. They carried out a DNA analysis in November of 2006. In order to obtain conclusive evidence, they compared samples from 4 Angela Wilde's sisters with rib bones found in her remains. The outcomes were definitive. It is confirmed that the 38-year-old body discovered in the South St. Vrain Canyon belongs to Angela Wildes of the Longmont, Colorado area. On February 28, 1968, Angela Josephine Wildes, better known as Angela J. Garcia, was born. There is no denying the lasting impression she made on everyone who knew her, even though the precise location of her birth and the identities of her parents are still a mystery. The address that Angela called home was 214 East State Avenue in Longmont, Colorado. Tammy Benson, one of her sisters, at last recalled Angela. She described Angela as a beacon of love and kindness, someone who had the natural ability to brighten any space with her warmth and sincere concern for other people. Her family wasn't the only ones who had these feelings. Her laughter was contagious, and her generosity were often mentioned by her Longmont neighbors and friends. Like all of us, Angela had passions, dreams, and aspirations. She was distinctive in her own right, with peculiar hobbies and traits. She clearly had a contagious zest for life, even though the details of her passion were kept private. She was a firm believer in living in the now, seizing each opportunity, and sharing love with everyone she met. Angela led a nomadic lifestyle without a fixed address or a regular job. Rather, she depended on the generosity of friends, frequently taking shelter on their couches. Because of her nomadic lifestyle, investigators had a difficult time piecing together her final days. Life is unpredictable. Nobody in Longmont could have predicted the tragic course of events that June of 2006, especially her loved ones. At the age of 38, Angela passed away suddenly. In order to learn more about Angela's life, detectives spoke with a wide range of her acquaintances, family, and friends. Still, there was mystery surrounding her last days. The identification of Angela's ski pants through DNA analysis at the crime scene provided a crucial lead. There was, however, more. Additionally, the same ski pants contained DNA from an unidentified male. 3 years after her remains were discovered, on January 22, 2009, another noteworthy event took place. Using DNA evidence, the Colorado Bureau of Investigation connected a man known as John Anger to the crime scene. Investigators started looking into any possible connection between Anger and Angela after receiving this lead. When they asked around, they learned that a number of people had seen the two together in late 2005 and early 2006. Detectives in Anchorage, Alaska, located Anger and conducted an interview with him in August 2009. He talked about his early 2006 travels and mentioned that he had gone to a dive school in Texas, after which he spent some time residing in Colorado, in cities like Longmont, Canyon City, and Monte Vista. Shortly after, he moved to Alaska by August. When Anger was asked about Angela Wilde and shown her photo, he denied ever knowing anything about her. In a follow-up interview with the Boulder County Sheriff's Office in September, he restated this position once more, even refuting any knowledge of the South St. Vrain neighborhood where Angela's body was found. However, Family members claimed Angerer frequently visited a cave in the South St. Vrain area, refuting his claims. He used to camp and hike near this cave, which is only a few miles from Lyons. His sister even related an incident in which she dropped him off right next to the site where Angela's bones would eventually be discovered. Angerer's buccal swab was obtained, and it was compared to the DNA discovered at the crime scene in order to confirm the link. The outcomes were instructive. The main profile inside the sleeping bag and on the pillowcase was Angerer's DNA. Born on July 28, 1969, John Michael Angerer is still a mysterious figure in the cold case of Angela Wilde. As of 2023, Angerer is clearly more than just a name in a case file, even though specifics about his early life, like his parents' names and place of birth, are still unknown. Even though the public hasn't been privy to much of Angerer's personal history, such as his upbringing, education, and family life, it's important to keep in mind that he wasn't an isolated individual. His actions were probably influenced by a variety of personal struggles and experiences, especially those that preceded his involvement in Angela Wilde's case. Regarding his criminal past, details of any crimes he may have committed in the past are unknown. In 2010, an arrest warrant for Angerer was prepared, marking the start of the investigation. He was being held in an Alaskan prison at the time for violating his probation. The Fort Collins Coloradoan stated that following a preliminary hearing in July 2010, a judge dismissed the case in spite of the growing body of evidence. The reason is that there isn't enough proof to link Angerer specifically to the crime. But when multiple acquaintances described Angerer's volatile nature, the story took a turn. Some even reported disturbing stories about him attempting to strangle his ex-girlfriends. He seemed to become extremely angry at the name Angela. After reviewing the case in 2015, a pathologist concluded that asphyxiation was most likely the cause of Angela's death, given the circumstances. The disclosure took on even greater significance in light of Angerer's purported history of strangulation. When we fast forward to 2023, the story takes on yet another turn. Angerer's ex-girlfriend, who had earlier denied any violent behavior from him, disclosed that Angerer had choked her several times while they were dating. This information, along with other evidence and witness statements, painted a disturbing picture of Angerer's involvement. Angerer and Angela were both identified by witnesses as being at the Bar El Motel in Longmont, Colorado, at the time of the crime. Another piece of the puzzle was added when the motel records confirmed their stay. Authorities presented their findings to a grand jury in February 2023 based on this growing body of evidence. On March 9, 2023, John Angerer was indicted. This was a turning point after many years. 53-year-old John Michael Angerer was taken into custody in Anchorage, Alaska, in relation to the case of Angela Josephine Wilde. The investigation of Angela Wilde's cold case has required tenacity, fortitude, and an unwavering pursuit of justice. As he considered the development, Boulder County Sheriff Curtis Johnson said, "I'm happy that we were able to advance our investigation into Angela Wilde's case. I'm really proud of our detectives because they didn't give up on this unsolved case. Angela's family has been looking forward to this day, and as we move forward, they continue to be in our efforts." The way the case has developed has given Angela's family hope and created new research opportunities. The question of whether John Angerer was involved in any other unsolved crimes in Alaska and Colorado is still being investigated. Anyone with information about this case is encouraged to come forward by the authorities. The Boulder County Sheriff's Office's Detective Mike McKinley can be reached at 303-441-4692. Angela's sister, Tammy Benson, has been a rock of strength during this whole ordeal. She expressed her hopes for the upcoming trials, saying, "I hope this time, the courts, the judge, and everyone involved truly listens. He needs to take responsibility for his actions now." Tammy remembers Angela as a kind and loving person, and her memories of her sister are warm and fuzzy. The decision to charge Anger again for the second time was a big deal. Tammy felt like the prosecutors had finally heard her pleas.
Felicia McGuire was 32 years old when she vanished on October 7, 2007, devastating her family and friends. Witnesses last saw her alive in the Boston neighborhood of Dorchester. The police carried out massive searches and thorough investigations. Still, she was never located. She vanished in mysterious circumstances, and the police received information of a person of interest engaging in questionable activity. But soon, the investigation was closed, providing no closure for Felicia's loved ones. The Boston, Massachusetts neighborhood of Dorchester is situated in the city's southern region. It is Boston's largest neighborhood, with a total land area of almost 6 square miles. Over 90,000 people from various ethnic backgrounds live in Dorchester, including Irish Americans, African Americans, Caribbean Americans, and Vietnamese Americans. Dorchester is now a rapidly developing neighborhood in Boston as a result of recent residential and commercial construction. This case we are looking at today takes place in this area. Felicia McGuire was born in 1975 in the lovely city of Dorchester. Although her father's identity is unknown, she was raised by her mother, Sharon McGuire. Felicia spent her formative years in a joyful household filled with love and laughter. She gave birth to her only son in 1997 and named him Nicholas Fahey. After the birth of her son, Nicholas became the core of her entire universe. It wasn't clear who Nicholas's father was, and what had happened to him, however, remained a mystery. Felicia never left Dorchester. She continued to reside there with her cherished son and her mother, building a home that was warm and loving, regardless of the obstacles and difficulties life hurled at her. Over the years, Felicia got into a relationship with a man by the name of David Pena. She also shared a home with him. Despite the difficulties of being a single parent, Felicia never wavered in her commitment to her child's welfare. She put forth endless effort to make sure her child had the finest life possible. She went above and beyond to provide her child the attention and assistance he needed. Felicia McGuire was a great example of a selfless and devoted mother who prioritized the needs of her child before her own. She never let life's challenges break her spirit. Unfortunately, all her efforts to see her child excel and become a great person in the society came to a stop when on October 7, 2007, Felicia McGuire disappeared without a trace. The 32-year-old devoted mother was last seen in Boston, Massachusetts' Dorchester area, where she lived. Nobody is aware of what happened to her after being seen going about her business on Rixton Street. Sharon, Felicia's mother, was devastated by the disappearance of her daughter, and the confusion surrounding Felicia's whereabouts only made matters worse. She looked through every telephone directory and potential contact she could think of, but her effort yielded no result. Felicia's failure to get in touch with her friends and family as the days passed by caused them to worry more and more. After 10 days, on October 18, 2007, Sharon McGuire finally reported her daughter missing. The Boston Police Department immediately got to work and opened an investigation into her disappearance. They soon found out that Felicia's behavior was not normal and that she had ceased speaking with her beloved son and other family members. This raised concerns that she may have been the victim of a terrible incident. Since it was not in her character to vanish without informing anyone, Felicia's family was very concerned for her safety and well-being. They wondered where she could be and what had happened to her. Her son and family had to deal with the lingering doubts about her fate. As the investigation progressed, law enforcement personnel put in a lot of effort to find any information that would help them solve the mystery. In an effort to piece together a timeline of Felicia's final known movements, detectives questioned members of her family, acquaintances, and neighbors. A thorough search of the neighborhood, including neighboring woodlands and bodies of water, was also carried out, in an effort to find the missing woman. Felicia's family got more worried as the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months. They never stopped wondering where their cherished mother and daughter was. The Boston Police Department was concerned about her disappearance as well. Because of the lack of information, they posted pictures of Felicia McGuire on social media in November 2013, in an effort to get any information that would help bring her home safely. They gave a thorough description of her in the social media posts. The police voiced great concern for her safety and well-being and listed her physical characteristics, including her height, weight, hair, and eye color. Felicia was a stunning woman with chestnut brown hair and piercing, life-filled eyes. She was a slim 5 feet 2 inches tall, weighed around 140 pounds, and had a medium frame. Felicia had been missing for more than 6 hard years, and as each day went by, the mystery surrounding her absence grew more complex. Despite investing a significant amount of time and resources in the search for leads, her body had never been located. However, following the Facebook post in 2013, several witnesses' report of Felicia's disappearance remained suspicious. An unnamed witness, who reportedly lived below Felicia McGuire and David Pina's flat in 2007, told the police that he remembers Pina, Felicia's live-in boyfriend, showing up at his door in the early hours of October 7, 2007, asking for a ride to his mother's house in Devon Street. The neighbor noticed blood on his clothes, but at the time, Pina had claimed that Felicia had stabbed him with scissors. However, the blood on Pina's shirt suggested something much more heinous had happened. The witness claimed that Pina informed him that during their fight, he had pushed Felicia against the wall with force, striking her head on the bed or dresser as a result. Pina then said he didn't know if she was still alive and seemed unconcerned about her fate. The witness continued to make observations of Pina. He claimed Pina's right hand was also swollen. When questioned why, Pina stated that Felicia had hit him with a baseball bat. Days later, 2 additional witnesses asserted that they had seen Pina return to the apartment on the same evening. According to them, around 3 or 4 in the morning that day, Pina returned home with another man and went upstairs. After some time had passed, they returned, dragging a blanket that may have contained Felicia McGuire's body down the stairs. The 2 witnesses attempted to assist but were turned away and told to mind their own business. To add to the mystery, another witness claimed that in 2007, after lending Pina his 2005 Chevy Impala in exchange for narcotics, he received it back with a shattered and freshly cleaned back seat. As the investigation went on, these troubling details led the police to suspect David Pina and raise doubts about what actually happened to Felicia McGuire. Without delay, investigators questioned David Pina about the case. They also discovered that he had a violent past with Felicia. Pina told investigators he was Felicia McGuire's live-in boyfriend at the time of her disappearance, and their relationship was anything but easy. Since Pina had previously told the first witness who had called the police that he and Felicia had engaged in a violent altercation at their apartment, the police questioned him about it. He then admitted that Felicia attacked him with a pair of scissors, stabbing him in the shoulder. Pina reacted by leaving the apartment and seeking safety at his mother's house, but when he came back a few days later, he made an unexpected discovery. Felicia had left, and her belongings had been taken. After the interview, investigators were forced to release Pina because there was no evidence against him, and he made no incriminating statements. Following this, the investigation into Felicia's death was a torturous journey full of detours that eventually led to every possible dead end. Although every lead was pursued and every piece of evidence was examined, the case grew colder with each passing day. Felicia's family and friends were in excruciating pain and desperately wanted explanations for her disappearance. For years, rumors and conjecture have been circulating regarding the whereabouts of Felicia McGuire, the adored mother who disappeared in 2007 without a trace. In 2017, when the FBI conducted a search in a heavily forested area of West Roxbury, fresh hope was generated. Days of investigation were conducted in secrecy, with no information provided to the press, leaving the public to speculate as to what had brought the authorities to that location. The truth came out in the end. The investigation into Felicia's disappearance was in fact related to the search, and it was an essential step in the drawn-out process of learning the truth. The search turned up a witness who told the detectives the shocking information that David Pina had requested his assistance in removing items from his apartment in 2007, including a heavy rolled-up carpet. He added that Pina and his accomplice had placed Felicia's body in the trunk of a car before speeding off. The witness who saw this claimed that he instantly had the suspicion that a body was wrapped in the carpet and blanket. Sadly, he was right in his assumptions. Finally, with the aid of the witness, Pina was able to carry Felicia's body into a wooded area with a parking lot where they dumped Felicia's body. The investigators were almost close to solving the case, but they needed to find the location where Felicia's body was dumped. However, the solution to this seemed to be a mystery that would never be solved despite numerous leads and witnesses. Before learning what happened to her remains, the witness left the scene. It was even made worse by the fact that the witness had no knowledge of Boston and was unable to offer any suggestions as to where the body might have been dumped. The prosecutor was unable to offer closure to McGuire's family and loved ones because they had been given a frustratingly incomplete picture of the crime. A few years later, on January 14, 2023, David Pena was successfully arrested by the Boston Police Department's fugitive unit at the Florida's Baker County Detention Center. Pena was wanted for a murder charge related to Felicia's case from Dorchester District Court, and he also had an outstanding warrant from Suffolk Superior Court for trafficking cocaine. Felicia left her young son behind when she disappeared from Roxton Street in Dorchester more than 15 years ago. Her family and friends who have been looking for her for so long may finally get some answers thanks to Pena's arrest. On February 15, 2023, Pena showed up in court for his arraignment on the charges leveled against him. After more than 15 years of uncertainty and heartache, the case has attracted national attention, and this most recent development has revived hopes of discovering Felicia's remains. The family of Felicia McGuire now has some sliver of hope. Despite the fact that her body was never discovered, police have reason to believe that her remains are still somewhere in the Boston region. An investigation that had remained cold for a while has now received some resolution following the news of an arrest. Felicia's family and friends can now rest easy, knowing that someone will be held accountable for her tragic disappearance, even though it couldn't bring back their beloved Felicia. We hope that justice will eventually be carried out. Pena will likely stand trial very soon and is scheduled to appear in court. Our thoughts and prayers are with Felicia's family and friends at this trying time. As they continue to recover from this unimaginable tragedy, we can only hope that they will find some solace and peace. What do you think about this case? Please leave your comments in the comment section below.
An almost 47-year-old mystery has now been resolved. A 16-year-old girl named Carol Sue Klaber was found strangled to death on June 5, 1976, shocking her family and the entire community of northern Kentucky. Despite years of investigation, there were no leads or suspects, and the case remained unsolved until new technology played a key role in putting the puzzle together. Who could have harmed Carol Sue Klaber in this way, and how did the murderer escape justice for such a long time? Hello and welcome back to Mystery Detective, where we explore baffling cases from around the globe. We'll explore the enigmatic Carol Sue Klaber case today, a 47-year-old cold case that was finally solved in 2023. Kentucky in the United States is home to the county of Boone. Boone County was established in 1798 and was named after Daniel Boone. The Cincinnati Northern Kentucky International Airport, a key hub for the area, is located in Boone County, which is the fourth most populous county in Kentucky. Burlington serves as the county seat, and the county is well known for its historical sites, outdoor recreation areas, and robust agricultural sector. However, a tragic murder would occur in this area of Boone in 1976. On November 28, 1959, a new life was born into the world in the state of Kentucky. Daniel Henry Klaber and Betty Jane Meek Reneker, her proud parents, were beaming with pride as they held their adorable baby girl in their arms and gave her the name Carol Sue Klaber. Thomas Klaber, her older brother, watched on in wonder, excited to welcome his new sister into the family. Carol was incredibly funny. She had a great deal of empathy for those who were less fortunate and was surprisingly modest for a teenager. At the age of 16, she volunteered at St. Charles Nursing Home. In her younger years, Carol had also been a Brownie and a Girl Scout. She loved to sew, cook, play records, and listen to music constantly. She began taking piano lessons when she was 5 years old. Carol was chosen by her piano teacher, Hattie Schatzman, to represent her students at the Ohio Music Teacher Association while she was also learning how to play the violin. She had performed 2 times at the Taft Museum. She was a beloved member of the Dixie Heights High School String Ensemble, thanks to her love of music and natural talent, and her classmates were drawn to her outgoing and kind nature. Sadly, her family, friends and teachers won't be able to see much of her talents anymore as a tragedy soon befell Carol. On June 5, 1976, as the sun rose and shined brightly over the Kentucky town of Union, Dr. Gaines Huey, a respected Walton dentist who was ready to attend to his patients' dental needs, left his home early in the morning as the neighborhood's residents started their days as usual. As Dr. Gaines traveled down Chamber Road, he noticed something unusual at the road's edge. He soon stopped his car out of curiosity and moved toward the thing. It wasn't until he was close enough that he realized what he had discovered. There was a body lying eerily still next to a culvert that served as a rainwater drainage pipe. Dr. Gaines, who was in a state of shock, immediately dialed the Kentucky State Police with trembling hands. Jan Wuchner just so happened to be working that day. Jan Wuchner, an experienced detective who had previously worked for the Boone County Sheriff's Department, hurried to the scene in order to solve the mystery surrounding the dead body that was lying by the roadside. Around 7:15 a.m., detectives from the Walton State Police Department arrived at the crime scene. With a keen eye for detail, their eyes swept the area where the body was. The detectives started their investigation after spotting the obvious indications of a struggle. Broken twigs and trampled grass suggested a violent altercation between the victim and her attacker. After being viciously attacked, the victim, who was a female, was strangled to death. As their sense of dread increased, the investigators grimly realized that this was a murder rather than a random act of violence. Despite their best efforts and their determination to search every possible angle in their pursuit of justice, the investigators were unable to uncover any tangible evidence at the crime scene. They then settled to look for information on the victim's body. Her body was taken to the county medical examiner's office so that a thorough autopsy could be performed. The medical examiner meticulously performed an autopsy, searching every square inch of the victim's body for clues. Every wound, scrape, and cut was meticulously recorded, and each hint was carefully examined. The gruesome details of her death were made clear by the autopsy findings. According to the evidence, she had endured a brutal beating. Her body was marked by the obvious effects of a tire iron used with relentless force. The once beautiful face was now deformed by swelling and bruising, and the examiner observed the woman's deep scalp wounds, which were probably caused by a blunt object. She had suffered an irreparable head injury from the crushing blow, which had tragically and prematurely ended her life. There were also obvious indications of physical brutality and abuse. All those involved experienced a heartbreaking moment, and the cause of death was finally identified as asphyxia brought on by manual strangulation and blunt force trauma to the head. The investigation took on a new level of urgency after the discovery of such viciousness. Investigators found some traces of foreign DNA on the victim's clothing while examining the scene's evidence. They did their best to match it to someone at the time, but they failed. They, however, carefully stored the evidence in the anticipation of future technological developments, confident that it might someday result in a breakthrough in the investigation. With the aid of DNA taken from the victim's body and their tireless efforts, detectives were able to track down the victim's brother. He mustered the courage to approach the body and identify it as his sister. Thomas Kleber, who was 23 years old at the time, entered the morgue as he stood in front of his beloved sister, Carol Sue Kleber's lifeless body on a cold metal table. His face was dripping with tears. Realizing that he would never again get to see his sister's radiant smile or hear her contagious laughter, the pain in his heart was unbearable. The investigators searched every possible lead as the investigation developed. They scoured the neighborhood, knocking on doors, talking to locals, and gathering any details that might shed light on the tragic incident. In order to understand Carol Sue Kleber's life and potential enemies better, they also dug deeply into her past and spoke to her family and friends. The investigators discovered that for the Kleber family, June 4, 1976, was a typical day. Getting on her bike, Carol Sue Kleber, a 16-year-old carefree teen, got on her bike and pedaled around town with a smile on her face as the wind blew her hair. She said hello to the neighborhood residents, talked with friends, and enjoyed the warmth of the summer day. She has arranged to meet a friend at Zeno's Hyde Park restaurant later on in the evening. She left her house at 5:30 p.m., but as dusk fell, a young man driving a swanky Chevrolet Monte Carlo followed Kleber back to her house. One of the neighbors claimed to have caught a glimpse of the young man, who was towering at 6 feet tall with a slim build. He had sandy blonde hair. The man and Carol spoke briefly before Carol entered the home, leaving the man outside in anticipation. A short while later, Carol came out from the house, hopped in the car, and left with the man. That appeared to have been the last time anyone would ever see Carol alive again. The murder of Carol Sue Kleber went unsolved despite the investigators' best efforts to find the owner of the suspected vehicle. The case wasn't moving ahead and every lead had been exhausted, leaving the detectives baffled. The case eventually became unsolved, and it remained that way for more than 40 years. A ray of hope appeared in the Carol Sue Kleber murder investigation after years of no progress. Coy Cox and Timothy Adams, two cold case detectives from the Boone County Sheriff's Office, gave the case new life in 2017. In their relentless pursuit of the truth and justice for Carol Sue Kleber, these two detectives teamed up with Jerry Keith, the first detective on the case, who had kept it so dear to his heart even after retiring. The trio used cutting-edge technology to work non-stop. In order to put together a fresh perspective on the tragedy that had baffled them for years, they painstakingly went through the old evidence, speaking with witnesses and sifting through leads. The two top suspects that Keith had earlier named were the focus of their initial investigation. The first suspect was a man with a history of auto theft, whose car had a startling resemblance to the one Carol was last seen in. The detective targeted this man and examined him closely in an effort to elicit any useful information from him. The man, who was a suspect in the investigation, denied any involvement in Carol's killing. He disclosed his past crimes to the detectives as he opened up to them, but he steadfastly maintained his innocence in Carol's murder. In order to compare his DNA to the DNA that was discovered in 1976 from the victim's clothing, the detectives collected his DNA. The results of the DNA analysis arrived in December 2018 after a long wait. Finally, detectives Cox and Adams called the man to let him know that his DNA results were negative and he was no longer a suspect in Carol's murder. On hearing this, the man realized he could finally breathe easily and begin his life afresh. He felt as though the weight of the world had been lifted from his shoulders. Following the DNA results, Cox and Adams returned to their tenacious hunt for the murderer. They were back at square one because the leads on their initial suspect had run dry. Then, in 2020, they made the decision to turn to their second suspect, who had already been found guilty of a vicious sexual assault in the same neighborhood just 2 years prior to Carol's murder. In 2020, he was 77 years old and went by the name Michael Dean Tate. Cox and Adams contacted Michael Dean Tate's assault victim from 1978 for her account of the assault as they worked to establish their case against him. She didn't reveal her name, but she remembered the night clearly. She described the frightening darkness of the Park Hills on the night of October 1, 1978, when she was viciously attacked at around 2 in the morning in her own garage. The victim remembered that despite her best efforts to fight and scream, her attacker seemed to take a sick pleasure in hurting her. But after 2 hours of hell, the attacker fled, leaving her wounded but still alive. Years passed before she was able to overcome the psychological and physical scars Tate had left behind on that fateful night. Cox and Adams were forced to consider the possibility that Tate might have been connected to the murder of Carol after learning about his involvement in the 1978 case. The detectives considered Tate as a prime suspect in Carol's murder case because he frequently traveled to the area for work in the 1970s and 1980s. Tate nevertheless maintained his innocence and denied any involvement in Carol's death despite the detectives' evidence against him. The detectives had hoped that their investigation would eventually point them in the direction of the offender. Their hopes were quickly dashed, though, when Tate's DNA was not found as a match to the DNA at the crime scene. Tate was also living in Cincinnati in 1976, according to court records, which ruled out his involvement in the crime. The detectives wondered if they would ever be able to solve this long-running case, which had lain dormant for nearly 50 years. The case remained unsolved until the Boone County Sheriff's Office contacted Othram Lab on September 17, 2022, because of their expertise in genetic genealogy. The Kentucky State Police Central Forensic Center sent a DNA sample from the 1976 crime scene to Othram Labs with funding from the Season of Justice. A team of expert scientists in Othram was able to create a complete DNA profile for the real suspect using advanced forensic-grade genome sequencing. With the aid of advanced technology, they were able to access priceless genetic data that had been kept secret for many years. Based on the comprehensive DNA profile they had created, the forensic genetic genealogy experts at Othram Labs used genealogy to generate leads for investigations. In a startling turn of events, Othram Labs provided a response on November 25, 2022, less than 2 months after receiving the DNA samples. By examining the genetic data left by the murderer, they identified a link to a man named Thomas W. Dunaway, who had passed away in 1990 at the age of 33. More research revealed that Dunaway had a son, but the boy had never met his father. The investigators made the trip to meet with Thomas Dunaway's son, whose identity was kept secret, in order to collect DNA samples for comparison. The outcomes of these significant laboratory examinations would hold the key to unlocking the mystery that had long eluded law enforcement. Detectives meticulously gathered the required samples with a desire to learn the truth and a firm commitment to justice. In January 2023, the case's lengthy investigation came to a conclusion. After nearly 47 years, Carol Sue Klaber and her family received justice when Dunaway's son's DNA partially matched the traces of DNA they had discovered on Carol's body years earlier. This was made possible by the use of cutting-edge technology and the detectives' dogged determination for justice. Although the process was difficult, the perseverance of those involved had paid off, leading to a discovery that would provide comfort to everyone impacted by the tragic events of 1976. The Carol Sue Klaber murder case was never given up on by the police. Thomas W. Dunaway, who was 19 years old at the time and was born on May 20, 1957, was able to remain undiscovered for a very long time. Detectives were able to learn important details about Dunaway's past and the terrible things he had done by being persistent and keeping an open mind. When Carol was last seen at her home with a man who resembled him, the police learned that he resided close to Devo Park. As they dug deeper, more negative information about Dunaway came to light. Dunaway was a persistent criminal. His 6-month crime spree had left a trail of evidence in the form of the vehicles he had driven away from each crime scene. Just 6 months after Carol Sue Klaber's death, in December 1976, he was found responsible for another murder, so the horror did not end there. Ronald Townsend, who was only 19 years old, was discovered lying on the ground shot to death. The news devastated the neighborhood, but Thomas Dunaway's capture and admission of guilt in Townsend's murder helped lift people's spirits. Dunaway received a life sentence, but sadly, he was only imprisoned for 7.5 years before being released in 1984. His release made the community wonder if justice could really be served. The terrifying pattern of violence and darkness that consumed Dunaway's life was revealed by Detective Coy Cox. Although Carol's murder may not have resulted in justice, the police were able to reveal the full scope of Dunaway's lethal and dangerous reign of terror. Ronald Townsend and Carol Sue Klaber murders both had unsettling similarities. Just a few inches from the road, both victims were left in full view as if the murderer were making a point. As the investigation progressed, authorities learned Dunaway was absent without leave from the army at the time of Townsend's murder. 9 days after Carol's murder, Dunaway had joined the military and was initially assigned to Fort Knox before being transferred to Fort Carson in Colorado. Thomas Dunaway, who had joined the military, couldn't seem to stay out of trouble. Dunaway had an unrivaled love for cars, but it ultimately brought him to ruin. He traded his beloved 1973 Chevrolet Monte Carlo for a striking orange Chevrolet Vega because he had an eye for a good deal. He had no idea, though, that the detectives looking into the murder of Ronald Townsend would be drawn specifically to this flashy car. Dunaway and his orange Vega were the targets of an all-points bulletin that the detectives relentlessly pursued. On the gloomy Christmas Eve of 1976, Dunaway was apprehended in South Carolina on suspicion of Townsend's murder and an unlawful possession of a firearm, putting an end to a long game of cat and mouse. The relationship between Carol Sue Claiborne and Thomas Dunaway has investigators perplexed as they look deeper into the mysterious case of Carol Sue Claiborne's murder. It's possible that Carol and Dunaway ran into each other when they were young and attended Erlanger-Ellesmere schools. But it's not clear how they ended up connected. However, in the midst of the confusion, Detective Coy Cox provided a crucial hint that might help solve the mystery. It's possible that Carol's love for the Vow Park led to a chance meeting with Dunaway. The park held a special place in Carol's heart. She had a reputation for being extroverted, so it's possible that's how she met him. Maybe they just happened to cross paths in the park, and as they laughed and shared stories in the calm environment, they became acquainted. There is no doubt that the park is significant to their relationship because Dunaway lived close to where Carol used to ride her bike. There was a mixture of relief and sorrow following the identification of Thomas Dunaway as Carol Sue Claiborne's murderer. The news that Dunaway passed away on December 28, 1990, at the young age of 33, left the family feeling conflicted, even though the authorities consider the case to be closed. Even though the Claiborne family is aware of the truth, justice still seems elusive to them. Thomas Claiborne bemoaned that he couldn't help but wonder what justice meant anymore and wished he could have confronted Dunaway before his death. Thomas Claiborne has been haunted by the memory of his sister's murder. He has carried this burden for almost 50 years, never being able to completely let go of the worry that his family might experience another tragedy. He calls his 28-year-old son, Daniel, late at night because he is so concerned about his safety. Like he lost his beloved sister, he is afraid of losing anyone else who is important to him. It's a fear that holds him in a vice-like grip and serves as a constant reminder of how fleeting life is and how vital it is to cherish the people we care about. The thought of disturbing his sister's final resting place was intolerable to Thomas Claiborne. His heart ached at the thought of disturbing her peaceful sleep in order to find her killer. Thankfully, investigators discovered an alternate route. They succeeded in exhuming the body of Carol Sue's killer instead of her remains. The fact that his sister can finally find peace and the small victories are what matter most to Thomas. The recent court order for Detective Cox to exhume Dunaway's body for DNA testing is proof that his commitment to seeking justice knew no bounds. Detective Cox was prepared to face whatever challenges lie ahead. The procedure of entering the DNA into Cody's may be just the start of a new chapter in the pursuit of justice. After almost 50 years, Carol Sue Claiborne received her justice. Lewis Kelly, the Commonwealth's attorney for Boone County, has declared the case closed even though her killer cannot be tried in a court of law. Detective Cox's eyes welled up with tears as he shared the bittersweet moment of telling Carol's brother that the murderer had finally been found after all these years. Even though the past cannot be changed, the satisfaction that comes from knowing the truth provides some solace in the wake of such a tragedy. After 46 years, Detective Coy Cox and his team have finally put Carol Sue Claiborne's murder mystery to rest, by mentioning Thomas W. Dunaway as the offender. This case demonstrates how committed law enforcement is to seeking justice for victims and their families, regardless of the length of time that may elapse. What do you think about this case? Comment below with your thoughts, and remember to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more engrossing true crime tales.
On February 27, 2011, a murder occurred in the village of Hyannis, which is found on Cape Cod, Massachusetts' southern coast. Todd Lampley, who was 31 years old, was fatally shot through his bedroom window. It took 12 years to uncover the truth behind Todd's murder, despite some shocking evidence that was discovered at the crime scene. Hyannis is a charming city that is tucked away on Cape Cod, Massachusetts' southern coast. This charming gem is full of history, natural beauty, and endless things to do. The serene waters of the Nantucket Sound surround the village, offering breathtaking sunset views and numerous opportunities for water sport enthusiasts. Hyannis's charming main street is lined with vibrant shops, art galleries, and eateries serving delectable regional seafood. For those who love history, the 35th President of the United States, John F. Kennedy, loved to spend his summers in Hyannis, and his life is chronicled in the John F. Kennedy Hyannis Museum. In addition to its cultural attractions, Hyannis is home to immaculate beaches that provide a tranquil retreat from the stress of daily life. Today, our case takes us to this city. On February 27, 2011, Hyannis, Massachusetts, was calm and peaceful, with a light breeze sweeping through the streets. However, nobody realized that the tranquility of the area was about to be shattered by a heinous crime. Todd Lampley, a young father and adored member of the neighborhood, was about to pass away suddenly. As the evening wrapped up that fateful day, a worried neighbor went to see how Todd was doing. He became aware of an issue as he got closer to Todd's house. He noticed that Todd's door had been locked from the inside. The neighbor became suspicious and immediately contacted the police. The detectives showed up at the address Todd's neighbor had given them. Their anticipation and fear sent their hearts racing. Nothing could have prepared them for what they saw. They could only imagine the worst-case scenario. When they arrived, they discovered a horrific scene. Todd Lampley, a 31-year-old man, had been shot dead through his window and was found lifeless on the floor of his bedroom. The crime scene was covered in blood. It was a horrifying scene. Hyannis residents as a whole were in disbelief. How could such a thing occur in their tranquil neighborhood? The investigation that followed Todd's murder uncovered secrets, lies, and shocking revelations that left everyone in disbelief. The investigators' shock turned to curiosity as they examined the crime scene. When they started to assemble the evidence, 3 shell casings and a black cell phone were discovered at the crime scene. It was clear that Todd had been ruthlessly shot from outside his window. The investigators were left perplexed and with a never-ending stream of inquiries. In an effort to find any clues that might help them identify the murderer, they thoroughly searched the area surrounding Todd's home. No lead went unexplored, and no stone went unturned. The detectives were aware that maximum attention to details is needed when it comes to cracking the case. To find anyone who may have heard or seen anything unusual on the night of the murder, detectives went from door to door and interviewed every local resident. As people told their stories, they paid close attention in order to piece together a timeline of events that would aid them in solving the case. However, when the detectives stumbled upon an odd object at the crime scene, Todd Lampley's murder case took an odd turn. Investigators discovered a sweet potato which appeared to have been used to muffle the gunshots. This sweet potato acted as a silencer. It appeared as though the murderer had been influenced by the popular HBO series, The Wire. Season 1 of The Wire features a tragic scene in which a woman is mercilessly shot and killed in her own home by a shooter who is hiding outside her window in the night. Before firing a fatal shot, the killer taps on the glass to draw her in. This terrifying scene is eerily similar to Todd Lampley's real-life murder in Hyannis, Massachusetts, where he was also shot through his bedroom window. However, this is not the only way in which the HBO series affected the murder. According to reports, in Season 4 of the same show, one of the fictitious police detectives solves a murder in which the perpetrator shot his victim to death using a potato as a makeshift silencer. The similarities between Todd Lampley's tragedy and the Wire world are unsettling and menacing. A demonstration of how honestly the show depicts life on the streets, where a similar trick was employed to conceal a gunshot. To muffle the sound of the shots that killed Todd Lampley, the perpetrator used a potato with a hole cut out in the center and placed it over a gun's barrel. Also, the cell phone that was discovered at the shooting scene was registered under the name of one of the show's characters, Marlo Stanfield, which heightens the intrigue of the case. To put it mildly, the relationship between the show and the crime scene was confusing. DNA evidence was found on the sweet potato after investigators sent it for testing. Even then, it would take years for investigators to connect this DNA to a specific individual. Investigators soon had another trail to follow. It was discovered that a handgun believed to have been used in the murder had been dumped into a nearby lake. Later, it was recovered by police after being fished out by citizens. Fortunately, detectives now had another lead in their inquiry. As part of his probation in a separate case, DeVaris Hampton, a man with a troubled past and a lengthy criminal record, was wearing a GPS monitoring bracelet at the time of the murder. Hampton was precisely where the gun was thrown into the lake according to location data from his GPS monitoring bracelet. Phone records showed that Hampton and a man who was at Todd Lampley's house at the time of the murder had exchanged phone calls and text messages many times. However, the strongest connection is yet to be uncovered. Detectives found evidence of a prior relationship between the victim, Todd Lampley, and the suspect, DeVaris Hampton. Hampton once claimed in court that Todd Lampley was responsible for the same area murder of Jacques Sellers in July 2007. It's interesting to note that Jacques was also fatally shot through the window. It appears as though Hampton was leaving a trail of clues for detectives to follow. It was only a matter of time before justice was done, because all the evidence pointed to him. Hampton had created a web of lies and deceit around himself, but it was beginning to fall apart. In 2011, after being detained in an unrelated case just a few days after Todd Lampley's murder, Hampton remained silent and declined to answer any questions regarding the Todd Lampley case when questioned. Although it was a frustrating obstacle, the investigators persisted. They were committed to solving the mystery no matter what. Years of diligent work were finally rewarded in 2016, when DNA evidence linked Hampton to the murder. Hampton had spit some of his phlegm into a puddle, and authorities collected some of it and used it to obtain a DNA swap without Hampton's knowledge. The results were conclusive when they were returned. The sweet potato's DNA matched Hampton's spit's DNA. It was a turning point in the investigation. The pieces were starting to fit together, but even with this damning evidence, it took until February 24th, 2023, to capture DeVaris Hampton. For the fatal shooting of 31-year-old Todd Lampley, 40-year-old DeVaris Hampton was apprehended and charged with 1 count each of murder and assault and battery with a dangerous weapon. When asked why Hampton's arrest was delayed for an extra 7 years, authorities chose not to address the reason for the delay in the tense and uncertain courtroom. In Barnstable District Court, Hampton made his initial court appearance on February 27, 2023, exactly 12 years after the fatal shooting. He pleaded not guilty to the charges against him, firmly declaring his innocence with a serious expression on his face. Despite the seriousness of the situation, DeVaris Hampton maintained his composure and resolve, knowing that he faced a protracted and difficult legal battle. As the judge scheduled his next court appearance for April 5, 2023, the courtroom fell silent. The investigation into Todd Lampley's murder may have reached a conclusion and a suspect has been named, but it's far from over. Russell Enos, an assistant district attorney, has been coy about the delay in the case, saying only that the evidence has been evaluated. Edward Fogarty, Hampton's court-appointed attorney, has pledged to mount a resolute defense and expressed faith in his client's innocence.